Hey everyone, has HPE become just another NVIDIA AI factory town? You're watching Techstrong Game. Hey everyone, happy Thursday. It's Alan Schimmel for Techstrong Gang. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a lot to go over, including news and a report on the HPE conference happening out in Las Vegas, some of it at the Sphere. Um, Let me introduce you to our gang members today, as we've been doing lately. Not a big introduction, but we're joined by regulars, John Swartz, who's actually in Vegas, Terry Robinson, Mike Vizard out in Denver still at the open source conference, and yours truly here, though by the time you're watching this, I'll be in New York at PlatformCon. Mike, I guess we'll go to you and throw it to John. HPE's put on quite a show out there in Vegas. First I've heard of a conference host using the Sphere, which is, I think, a great idea. But beyond the optics of that, is this really being, are they marionettes on the strings of NVIDIA? What's going on, Mike?
Sure. It sure seems that way because not only is HPE using the same terminology to describe, essentially building AI workloads on on-premise IT environments, but Teradata was out this week saying the same thing, and I've seen Dell use the same terminology, and anybody who kind of builds anything that looks like a server that goes into a local data center is suddenly singing the same tune that NVIDIA kind of seems to have scripted, which is this notion of an AI factory. But John, I'm in Denver. You're there. What's your take?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You guys are stealing my thunder. I was going to refer to NVIDIA as the puppeteer and all this, because coming even down to the keynote speech, I'm just looking at something that the CEO of HPE, Mr. Neary, said. He said, soon it will be IT's responsibility to manage a digital workforce. That's like straight out of the NVIDIA playbook. We all had our Jensen Wang comment as well. He wasn't in attendance. He was here last year, but he talked about the same.
Jensen Wang
was not here. No. What they should have done is they should have had an avatar of him that was generated by AI and have him appear on stage, because that was about the only thing missing from the presentation. And if I can just be really quick about the presentation at the Sphere, you're right, Alan. They used the Sphere almost upstaged the entire announcement, but it also, I think in a weird way, kind of a brilliant stroke, because they're showing what you can do with their technology as part of the presentation versus telling you, they're showing you. So in a sense, I mean, I'll give them credit for that. But essentially what they want to do and what they're talking about is making the enterprise, putting it back into the hands, the era of AI, into the hands of IT. They were kind of expanding on this previous agreement with NVIDIA, and they were talking about this AI factory solutions with composable solutions optimized for service providers, model builders, sovereign entities. They also talked about GreenLake intelligence. And basically, they hammered home this idea that through networking and they hope, soon to be completed acquisition of Juniper, through their hybrid cloud, and then through their AI strategy, they are going to be the solution for the enterprises. Neary made a good point that in a sense, the enterprise adoption of AI has been business-led initiative. It's not an IT-led initiative. So now they want to make the transition to the IT team and help them in administrative tasks. In a sense, it's pretty vanilla. It's kind of bland, but it plays into the NVIDIA playbook. And I mean, and again, it's a sense of deja vu. We get our prerequisite comments from Jensen. We get the hugging or the kissing of the ring of NVIDIA. But in a weird way, I think what HP was trying to articulate, and we talked to Daniel Newman, who's here, about it. It's in a sense, they differentiate themselves from their competitors in a sense with the way they presented this, with their software strength and the hybrid cloud. So it was overall an effective presentation. And you're going to have to start pulling out all the stops, because there's so many of these announcements that are basically treading or trotting over the same ground saying the same thing, the same phrasing. It's almost as if NVIDIA has decided they are going to be part of the presentation of every conceivable enterprise announcement in this field. And their imprints everywhere.
Maybe, I look at this stuff and I scratch my head a little bit and I go, they're so busy on the hype and following the thing that they're kind of missing the point. And what seems to be happening is that I would say the first generation of AI platforms were built by data science teams that had their own internal IT infrastructure people attached to that. And they built a single application that ran on a single set of hardware and servers. It might have been in the cloud, but a lot of times it was in an on-premise environment. As this evolves, it's pretty clear that every application is going to have some AI capability, and we're going to need infrastructure that can run multiple AI applications, and it's going to have to be managed at a level of scale that is highly distributed. And that requires the traditional IT team to show up and kind of manage all that stuff, because the folks attached to the data science team are not going to be able to do this at scale. And that's why you see HPE and Dell and everybody else showing up saying, we need something that feels more like a little more turnkey, like traditional servers, versus all this custom infrastructure that we've been building out for the last couple of years. And in my mind, that's the big shift here. And everybody else seems to be kind of just, trying to say it's going to be an AI factory. Frankly, I don't really like that term, because who the hell wants to go to work in a factory? But
according to our government, we got a lot of work.
I know.
But, I have a few other thoughts here. Look, if it's NVIDIA who's pulling the strings at all of these shows, does that make Jensen El Padrino the Godfather? Right? You kind of like the Mario Puzo thing. But Mike, to your point, look, I think the first generation of AI stuff was very much experimentation. It was very much first generation, and it was sort of bespoke, custom kind of thing done for very specific tasks and solution sets. But now we're looking at AI, to do a Buzz and Woody meme. Look, Woody, AI as far as the eye can see, right? AI for everything. And in order to do that at scale, you are going to need mega factories like where Elon produces his batteries or wherever, right? You're going to need these. And quite frankly, we so much, at least our focus here at Techstrong on AI is how AI helps generate code and can make us more secure and can help us build platforms, and how we use AI in IT. Well, let's not forget that much of software development today is done in a software factory where we have different teams in the factory. We have developers, we have platform engineers, we have DevOps engineers, we have SREs and security folk, right? All working on the factory floor, so to speak. So now that factory is an AI factory. Same people, different name. Meet the old boss, same as the new boss.
Yeah. It's like it's the whatever. What did Benioff call it? I always hated that phrase, but it's the fourth industrial revolution, whatever the hell it was. But so, in a sense, HPE, and I talked to a couple of the executives here. They're just hammering home, trying to reach the CIO level, the IT level, as the service brokers, the folks who are going to put this into play. So, yeah, we can romanticize about the beginning and the innovation. Now we're kind of reaching the mass deployment where things become a little bit more watered down and not as exciting or sexy. They're trying to be more practical. So we're going to get hit in the head with this over and over again.
No, I think so. I think the bigger issue is, so you take your HPs and your IBMs and your Amazons and your Googles and your Microsofts and all of these other, the Oracles, the big tech players who can, churn out these factories for large enterprises. And how are they separating themselves, right? So NVIDIA is a tide that's lifting all of these boats. But are they truly interchangeable, or will we see spheres of influence, spheres of specialization that separate HP from Dell, from IBM. Or if they're all the same and it's a commodity race down the toilet bowl, that doesn't bode well for these companies.
I don't know. It's too early to say, but I will also point out that will happen for sure is CIOs will be getting out their pencils and they'll be creating these AI project bills, and there'll be like a bill running through Congress. There'll be so many additional writers and things that they're adding to that have nothing to do with AI because they just want to make sure that they get approval for 100 other things. And
Yeah, we're blaming for that either. That's the way of it. As much as things change, they stay the same. Anyway, John, is the show over now, or is today
No,
the
it's still going. There's going to be a second keynote. I talked to there's a lady who oversees. She came from Intel a couple of years ago. Trish Dem Kroger, who's going to be giving a keynote.
You applied for asylum or something, or
yeah, I can't get out of here soon enough. But yeah, no, it's an interesting show. When I see these things, I'm trying to figure out what is it unique about these companies that they're going to announce, and for the most part, there really isn't much. So I'm always trying to find, and I think we're all kind of talking about this idea of how do you differentiate yourself and not become part of this morass of mediocrity, right? Where you're just stuck in the middle and
foot soldiers in the NVIDIA crime family.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, yeah, I didn't think of it that way, but yeah. Let's stick with that. That's more interesting.
Yep.
But no, I think what they were trying to do is they were using the sphere. I mean, cynically, they're using the sphere as the star of the show. So they had two events here. They had the keynote, which was pretty effective, and then they had a concert later. So they're trying to spend as much time there as they are actually at the convention center.
The sphere is spectacular.
It is.
Played with the concert?
Yeah. Oh, it's Kenny Chesney. Yeah.
Oh, he's playing there now.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing too is I wonder if, and the people at HPE were telling me that they actually, they admitted to me off the record, like we know we're considered a dull company, but we think the way we use this venue might influence the way other companies do it. I think they're onto something. I wouldn't be surprised.
I think other companies will too now.
ServiceNow will probably do it. Adobe definitely should do it here.
I can't wait to see what NVIDIA does with it.
NVIDIA would do a spectacular job, but y'all see.
All right. I would encourage as many venues as possible to use the sphere so that the Dolans will have enough money to buy a good center for the Knicks.
Oh gosh.
Well, let's hire a coach first. Like, I have no confidence. You know what? We're going to end this one. We'll take a break. We'll be right back here on the Techstrong Gang.
Hey folks, we're back on the B block and we're talking about, well, what's real and what's not real here with these AI coding tools for developers. I mean, clearly there are advances that are being made, but there's always this kind of hype cycle around this stuff. And you hear people talking about, well, we won't need developers won't need the code, they'll just review code and we'll get rid of most of the developers and we'll only have architects from here. And there's all kinds of noise in the system all over the place. So we have this article and it's a moment in time and it basically outlines what actually works and what may not work so well. And one of the things that works well is anything to do with project management, and it will definitely generate code, but a lot of that code may not know enough about the environment it's going to run in, so it lacks a lot of context. So human developers might have to go in there and tweak it and make it work for that environment. But then again, they didn't write it in the first place, so they didn't know how it works. So now they're feeling, well, maybe I should have just wrote this whole thing from the ground up myself. Alan, you hear all the same noises I hear. What's real in your mind here, and where are we on this journey?
You know, I would say we're still at the beginning of the beginning, not even at the end of the beginning when it comes to AI generated code. Eh, and what I find interesting, Mike, is the proficiency of AI generated code and the progression wave of how it's getting better. I think closely mimics the progression wave of AI generated text writing, right? When AI first came out, it was very easy to spot something that was written by AI. It was cold, it was easy to spot. It's gotten much harder, though I think it's still, for instance, I think this article on DevOps was AI assisted, let's call it. I think it's the same thing with code. You know, the latest version of Claude, what did they call it? Claude Code or something like this, is supposed to be much, much better at generating usable code. For the foreseeable future, and when we're talking in text, foreseeable future, 6 months, right? 12 months at the most. I think AI generated code is still a question of having a co-pilot in the co-pilot chair next to you. I don't think, except for the most rudimentary kind of apps that you could probably do in no code today anyway, you would be relying on AI generated code for the majority, for the heavy lift, right? I just don't, I don't think it's there yet.
It seems like these things get better in leaps, right? Every 6 months or so, there seems to be a leap forward. And Terry, I want to get your opinion on something here because somebody was telling me this morning. He said, the leap that we saw at the beginning of this year, the tools actually recognize, SQL injection vulnerabilities, which has been the number one flaw since for a decade now. And they were saying, hey, we might get to a point soon where that's no longer going to be an issue because AI coding tools will actually not generate those types of vulnerabilities. However, they will generate other types of vulnerabilities.
Therein lies the problem because I think that's right. I've heard that as well. These tools are going to, really spot the security issues or some things, a SQL injection being one, but and that'll be good for security, right? But it's still can be used equally for bad, I think. And there are going to be some things that are missed, and this vulnerable code will be repeated. I mean, there are still all of those issues. I think what it's really super good for is putting it up for review. Putting your code up for review and seeing if there are any issues there. But I think, Alan, you're kind of right. It has to be there, as a co-pilot, right? Because there has to be this human oversight and this monitoring. Otherwise, I think it could be a disaster as far as security is concerned.
And security I always preach that security should be synonymous with quality. There are other quality issues beyond security with AI generated code. Is it the most resource efficient code, right? Is it run like a pig or is it really optimized? Now, one may say that a great use of AI is having the human write the code and maybe asking the AI to optimize it, right? And maybe that's switching seats. But, there's a lot we could do. But Mike, to your point and what I was saying off the top is, look, this is progressing. This is multiplying faster than triples on Star Trek. And, 9 months from now, who knows how good, a year from now, a year and a half from now, we will be eating our words. But as we look today, this is, I think, the state of the art.
There is an interesting generational divide starting to emerge where the younger developers are saying, well, this is great. It makes me more productive and I can create stuff. And I think that appeals to maybe the senior level business executives because they hear that that means that I can use developers with less experience. But the older developers are saying, conversely, this is great because I don't need any junior developers running around because I can use AI to do all this stuff, and that they will be the primary beneficiaries thereof. And they will become more efficient, and it will be just harder than ever for your junior developers to break into the field in the first place because junior developers don't know anything about how that app runs in, say, a retail environment or financial services or whatever it is. I don't know how much of this is kind of, just old guard versus new guard, but it's an interesting conversation that's being had out
Well,
there.
yeah, and then where does that, I mean, you have to think beyond that a little bit. Where does that put younger developers later on in terms of their trajectory, to develop? I mean, if all of this stuff, they're being replaced at sort of the lower levels even, then we're not really developing a cadre of developers that have the expertise and can move forward, you know?
Well, I call this the reverse Logan's Run. Speaking of generational gaps, Mike, I thought you would make reference to my Star Trek reference, but it's a reverse Logan's Run, right? If we kill everyone when they're 30, we don't have any people over 30. and yeah, and it's the same thing. If we don't have junior developers cutting their teeth, we don't, eventually when those senior developers run out, you don't have anyone taking their place other than maybe the AI. Okay, so that will be a lost art.
And maybe not one that we should lose. I mean, there's some things that, if you lose them.
I absolutely agree. We shouldn't lose it, but are we destined for the servo chairs in Wall-E, whatever the movie was?
I don't know. I'm concerned about that. I also get concerned about, and this is going to really make me sound like an old fogey out there somewhere. I get concerned about developers who then come up in sort of this newer environment and they don't have that sort of experience of way back when the environment was locked down and, things were done a certain way and with a lot of attention to, I guess, security, as maybe more than today. But I do worry about that.
But so guys, let me just say this though. We've been doing Techstrong Gang now for, is it 18 months? Something like that. And we've been talking about AI for at least that long, at Techstrong. And we've been having the same conversation. Is AI good at coding? Is AI going to replace my coders? Is AI,
in terms of any type of content creation, will it replace whomever, not just coders, but writers, editors,
TV, video hosts,
editors? Yes,
could be. Am I real or am I an AI? But and we've seen progress, as you say, Mike, leaps and bounds in progress. I mean, I don't even think it's every 6 months. I think it's every couple weeks with every new release of one of these AIs. They do better. Do you still, at some point though, does that progression graph curve flatten out, right? Where we can't make further improvements without some hot new chip? I mean, is there like a Moore's law kind of thing here where it continues on that upward trajectory? Man, if I knew the answer to that, I probably wouldn't be doing this. But I think that's really the issue. Not a question of where we are today, but how fast tomorrow comes.
Yeah. And I just feel like right now, too much of this conversation is wrapped around the fear factor. And everybody's trying to kind of, and I don't know, you read stuff in the Times and they'll say, the C-level execs are trying to use AI as a boogeyman to, whip the labor force into line. Others would say, the fact of the matter is that it's the labor force that may benefit most because a lot of that toil that wears them out and kind of makes them cranky at the end of the day might get eliminated. But it's not to the
As
point
will
where
some of their jobs.
right.
Some of the jobs, well, the caveat is, but there'll be better jobs. So there will be better jobs. I don't know what they'll be, but there'll be better jobs. But here's the thing. You want to know the truth? None of that matters. None of that matters because we live in a market-driven economy, in a market-driven system. And if someone could do it better, faster, cheaper, they will. In spite of what the voters in New York City may think, right? We're not communists. We're not even socialists. If someone could do it, if I could use something to do it better, faster, cheaper, I will, and the market will reward me. That's the bottom line. So we could wring our hands and woe is me all we want, but that's the realities of the market. Fair?
I would say that it's fair. I just don't think it's going to reach a point where it does not require some sort of human supervision oversight anytime soon.
It shouldn't reach that point.
They said the same thing about driving cars.
Of which, most people are not driving self-driving cars for a reason.
I just remember the reference to yesterday's show about the robo-taxis. But anyway, we shall see. We shall see.
As I look out my window, I do not see any self-driving cars going by right now.
I know, but 3-4 generations.
They're in San Francisco, Austin, and Phoenix. Yeah.
3 or 4 generations ago, Mike, your grandpa or great-grandpa looked out the window and said, I don't see any horseless carriages.
No.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is that.
And if he did, he yelled out the window and told the guy to get a horse.
Well, that was I saw a meme on this recently, right? A guy telling a horse, don't worry, something's going to have to pull these carriages, that we weren't going to replace the horse after all.
I think the horse might like to be replaced, to be honest with you. It must get awfully tiresome pulling those carriages.
Absolutely. Anyway, all right, let's take a break. We'll come back here on Block C for the Techstrong Gang. Good conversation. You're watching Techstrong Gang.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
All right, we're back talking about our final block, which is cybersecurity focused in the sense of, there are these people out there, bad folks, adversaries, and they too have access to AI. And it turns out that they've been doing a little innovative work on their side as well. Terry, you have a story talking about how the bad guys are using Grok and Mistral's Mixtrol platform now, and how much of this is going to continue? Because it seems like, from my perspective, they may be doing this faster than the good guys. I think
the bad guys are always a little bit faster than the good guys. That's just my opinion. But so this all centers the conversation starts with Worm GPT. And you guys might remember, follow me back to the summer of 2023, and it had its sort of blaze of glory, Worm GPT, for about a month, right? And then one of the founders, actually, I guess, shut it down, was getting ready to get in a little bit of trouble, and that happened. And so I think when I was working on the story, I thought this is a surprise, but not a surprise, because you expect generative AI and whatever to be insinuated into just about everything these days. And also, you don't ever expect that worms and other things go away completely, right? They always seem to come back and have a new life. And Worm GPT was kind of interested because while the sort of original flavor went away, it's been sort of the basis for these worms that are AI powered through, I guess, the last couple of years. I think somebody called them. It's like the Kleenex of of worms, but. And so everybody, a lot of these things have been built on GPT as sort of the platform that ended up happening the stuff for a while. And really, the folks over at Cato Control went back and looked at the last couple of years and found out that a couple of strains had emerged that were powered by Grok or Mixtral. And that's got some interesting implications for security, for sure.
Do you have a sense of whether these strains are more lethal or less lethal than the strains that humans created, or is it just going to be there's a lot more?
I think there's a lot more of them, but I also think that maybe the real issue here is it allows attacks to scale. It's I guess the breadth and the depth of the problems that it can cause with security is just much greater. So in that sense, maybe more lethal.
Yeah. Alan, the other thing that I've seen too is it seems like the malware as of late is better at evading the defenses that we have. And I got a sneaking suspicion that may be because somebody's using AI tools to keep generating new variants of the same malware that makes it difficult to detect. But
Well, Mike, I've heard rumors that a lot of these variants were actually developed in a lab in Wuhan, and and they've escaped into the wild. But shades of mRNA. But I mean, here's the all kidding aside. Here's the fact. I had this conversation the other day with the CIO of a company called Deep Instinct. They have an AI that helps with security. Don't think for a second, for even a millisecond, that the people who propagate worms, the bad guys, the black hats, whatever you want to call them, are not as proficient or maybe even more proficient than some of the best security people we have. And so, of course, they're using AI to polish up and upgrade, up-level, upskill their work. You're seeing it across the board. Look at the phishing emails you get now compared to what you used to get. Phishing emails used to look like they were written by Boris and Natasha. Or, kill squirrel. But now you got to look really close. They're written really, really well.
Well, that's as you were saying in the earlier segment about AI, generated writing has gotten so much better. It's the same.
Yeah. So why wouldn't these guys be running their worms and telling the AI to create a variant? Now, this is where you get into this whole issue, though, of do you have guardrails on your AI and LLM that if someone says create a variant of this worm, it says, no, I can't do that. And then you're going to have, unlocked AIs and LLMs that are only too happy to do that for you. And you set up this whole kind of underground of against the empire, renegade AIs churning out this stuff. Or if you're a researcher, researchers might have valid reasons for asking an AI to do a variant of some code thing to, similar to fuzzing in terms of testing code and everything. So this is not an as easy thing as you would think.
Terry, it doesn't look to me like the guardrails that are in place really do much, because from what I'm reading, the bad guys figured out how to work their way around those things pretty easily.
And that's just about everybody that I talked to for this story said that, right? The guardrails work, which means you're going to have to rethink what those guardrails might be.
Well, they don't work today,
They don't.
but maybe we got to put more thought into making
Well,
better
maybe
guardrails.
so. And is the answer around like sort of we've talked about this before, maybe limiting AI automation? Would that, help better monitoring to try to spot the problems and then adjust your guardrails accordingly? Perhaps maybe guardrails aren't solid. Maybe they are a little bit flexible. I'm a security person saying that, I'm sorry to say, but I think that's possibly the case. And, but the guardrails clearly aren't holding up at this stage.
No. I mean, again, I guardrails are sort of artificially grafted on to the AI. They're not. Maybe we need to design AIs guardrails built in from the get-go, and maybe they'll be. I don't know what the right answer is the bottom
that probably
line.
hits
Certainly.
on it too. This is a very this is stronger evidence that we shouldn't bolt on security any longer. I mean, and that's what's happened with AI because generative AI in particular, because of its rapid growth.
But it's happened with every technological innovation for as long as I've been in tech, 30
but this
plus
just has
years.
potential to just explode so quickly. And I think that's, I'd like to see those guardrails built in from the get-go.
Well, here's what I think is wrong with the guardrails is the people who are building them are the same people who build the LLMs, and they're designing those LLMs to be as useful and as friendly as possible. And well, guardrails kind of go against that notion. So maybe the folks who build the guardrails should not be the same people who are building the LLMs.
100%. Or they need to at least work in concert, right?
Mm-hmm. All right. Guys, I think that's going to wrap up our Techstrong gang. Mike, you're due home tomorrow. John, you're coming home tomorrow, I take it?
I'm coming home tonight or today. Yes, whatever today is. Yes.
I will be on the gang. I will be on the gang from Denver tomorrow, but then I'm hopping on a plane immediately.
I feel like I need to go someplace so I can come home.
Yeah, you got to.
Why don't you go to the next Las Vegas AI show, Terry?
I might do it.
Maybe they do it at the Sphere and talk about an AI.
Yeah, go to the Sphere. Have a good time.
All right. Until next time, though, wherever you are, enjoy Techstrong TV immediately following our gang show today. And until then, it's Alan Schimmel. We're out. Hey everyone, welcome back here to Techstrong TV. Happy to introduce you to my next guest. We were talking so much before we got on camera, we almost didn't have time to do this one. But I want to introduce you to Russell Fishman of the Stanford Fishmans. He's the senior director. Yes, the senior director, global head of solutions product management over at NetApp. Russell, welcome to Techstrong TV. How are you?
Very good, and thank you for having me, Alan.
My pleasure. Russell, as I mentioned, you're Senior Director of Solutions, Global Solutions Product Management over at NetApp, but give people a little bit of a sense of your journey.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, based in the northeast of the US, and you can tell that by my native accent, my native New York,
you sound like a Yankee.
Bronx accent, actually.
I was going to say it's a Yankee accent. But
it's a Yankee accent, yeah. So actually, I started off my career in the UK, originally an economist. Long story how I got into tech, but started off my career at a company called EDS. Remember Electronic Data Systems?
Sure. Ross Perot.
That's right. Was there for about 10 years. Got the opportunity to do lots of different things in lots of different parts of the world. Really great sort of foundation for my career. Ended up at HPE as part of that acquisition. Moved to Cisco. Ended up at NetApp and been at NetApp actually 10 years, which is
My
You never go
God.
into these things thinking you're going to be there for 10 years, loving it. And NetApp has, has been such an organization that's transformed completely during the time I've been here. But it's been super exciting. So yeah, lived all over the world, but now based in the US with family, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And look, I'm a product manager, but I have a tech background. I also have a business background, obviously, with being an economist by trade. So, I always, my role at NetApp has always been, and I've always been very focused on customer. So what does that mean? Obviously, everyone says that, but solutions at NetApp really, it's the glue that connects our product portfolio with customer use cases and customer outcomes. So I spent all of my time talking to customers, talking to partners, learning the latest trends, working with analysts, and sort of designing the roadmap on what we're going to do in terms of bringing our portfolio to help customers in a wide range of different areas. AI being, of course, probably the most interesting right now.
Absolutely. Well, everybody's interested in AI, right?
Sure.
Fantastic. What a great story, Russell. A great journey. So NetApp, everyone in our audience has heard of NetApp. Unfortunately, not a lot, but there's a good percentage of them who still think of NetApp as network attached storage, right? And that kind of thing. And of course, NetApp has been so much more for so long, including right up the very current AI stuff. How would you describe today's NetApp, especially you're there 10 years, Russell? How would you describe today's NetApp to our audience?
Yeah, it's a great question, Alan. And there's so many aspects to what NetApp does. But at its really core, we like to think of ourselves as an intelligent data infrastructure company. Now, that sounds like a marketing blurb, but it actually isn't. It really talks about the value that we bring to organizations who are trying to make their data do something for them, right? And we firmly believe that customers that are organizations that are sitting on essentially gold mines of data, and we're looking at new workloads like AI where the fuel is the data. How do we make that data ready for these new workloads? Where is the data? How do we bring it together? How do we operationalize it? How do we simplify it? So NetApp, made a bet, I think maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more on cloud. We believed that the future was hybrid. We went about taking our class-leading storage OS ONTAP and OEMing it essentially to the hyperscalers, and that turned out to be prescient. Essentially, what we did is we created these endpoints that allowed us to make it so seamless for organizations to manage their data wherever it needed to be managed. They didn't have to take it outside of their own governance domain, their own security domain, but they could make it available for all these new workloads. And of course, that takes us right out to AI. I've been doing AI for about 5 years, and essentially all these bets that NetApp made are just perfect for the world of AI. NetApp has about 100 exabytes of data stored on us today, right? Our history has definitely been things like unstructured data. But if you look at, we see a sort of plethora of different data types. It's unstructured, it's semi-structured, it's structured data, it's file, it's block, it's everything you could imagine on the storage side. But again, the focus is really on the data manageability side. So yeah, NetApp is not, we started off in filers many years ago, but the company has gone through so many revolutions since then that you could hardly call us that anymore.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Crazy. All right. Let's shift gears a little bit. NetApp recently did something called the AI Space Race Survey.
Right. Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, so it was a report that we commissioned, and what we wanted to do, listen, we're at a really interesting juncture in AI in particular. We're coming out of what I like to call the POC wave. And I know that's probably an oversimplistic view, but if you think about what's been going on in organizations and the sorts of organizations that have availed themselves of AI, try to go down that path, so many of them have really been trying things out. So few of those projects have made it into reality, right? But at the same time, what we see is an incredible interest at a nation state level for how important and critical AI is going to be to the relative competitiveness of these different economies across the globe. right? So, as we've obviously NetApp's been involved in AI for 7.5 years, we've been building and helping customers with AI. We wanted to go out beyond the confines of NetApp's installed base, but really to the industry as a whole, and ask folks, leaders in 4 different countries. That's the US, China, India, and the UK, which we thought was a fairly representative set of countries, economies. So across both CEOs and IT execs, to understand, how do you perceive your own AI readiness? How aligned are you within your organizations? And really, who thinks they're winning the AI race? Who's actually positioned to lead over these next 5 years? And trying to understand the role of government and policy in driving this huge wave of innovation, compared to, of course, the private sector, who's obviously seeing a huge opportunity, but maybe thinking about things more through a financial lens. So it is super interesting, and I hope we get into some of the details about what we learned. It really, some of the data we got back was intriguing.
Well, that sounds like a setup if I ever heard one.
Yes, right.
Do tell,
yeah.
Russell.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll give you a sort of an interesting example of some of the data points we're going to talk about, right? So, I talked about this idea of these CEOs and IT execs, and we asked both of them, and the reason for that is because the perception of the CEOs and the reality of the IT execs aren't necessarily the same thing, right? And sure enough, that's exactly what we found. So in the US, for example, both CEOs and IT leaders found themselves at around the same percentage of readiness. So 61% of both CEOs and IT leaders in the US found themselves ready for AI. Now, of course, that's their own perception, but it was stark that both sets of these groups said 61%, about 61% said they were ready. But then we looked at China, an extreme here. 92% of CEOs in China believed that they were actually deploying AI. They were deploying AI, but only 74% of the IT leaders believed they were deploying AI. So just to be clear, CEOs believed that they were all deploying, essentially 92%, the vast majority were deploying AI, where only actually less than 3/4 were actually doing those deployments today. So, I think that, this is one of the things we'll talk about as we go through it. It turns out that this idea of that intelligent data infrastructure I mentioned, which is kind of scalable and it's secure, data actually turns out to be one of the biggest and most important, the most decisive factors in whether AI ambitions translate into lasting advantage. And we, you wouldn't think that. I've got to tell you this one thing, Alan. If you go out in the industry and you go to a bunch of folks, a bunch of custom organizations that haven't started the AI journey yet, right? They're just getting started. They've read what they've read. They think there's opportunity there. There's potentially money to go and do something. Most of these folks think that the problem is what we call an accelerated compute problem, like GPUs, essentially, right? And there's so much credit to NVIDIA for doing what they've done, right? They have made this all about GPUs, and God bless, that's a fantastic thing for them. And by the way, GPUs are not a insignificant part of the problem, right? But it's quite telling that, in the last GTC, which is NVIDIA's public conference, what we heard was that their CEO, Jensen, talk about data for about 45% of his time. Just to think about that. This is a company that doesn't sell data solutions, right? They sell AI GPUs, but more importantly, they sell an incredibly rich framework and software stack to make AI real. And they were talking about their data management partners. Why do we think that is? It's because what's holding them back is the data, right? That's how important it's become to them. So anyway, yeah, well, we should dig into a few more things around the report, but I just thought I'd give you that background.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, Russell. A couple of thoughts on it is, first of all, the AI is as good as the LLM it was trained on. And the LLM is as good as the data set that it's made up of, right? And, the first L in LLM is large.
Right.
And the larger, at some level, the larger, the better. Though there's also people saying, no, let's go for small language modules, right, that are more keyed into a very specific, narrow field, if you will. But here's what I really find interesting, Russell, and I actually spoke about this last week on a LinkedIn post or video I put up, which is I agree with your findings. I think most companies have they're either dipping their toes in the water or talking about dipping their toes in the water. But here they are, and some of the biggest companies, announcing layoffs and saying, "Oh, well, it's due to we're gonna replace some of these workers with AI." We may very well replace some of these workers with AI, but not today. I don't think today. I'd be interested to see if your survey found that.
We that wasn't an area we focused on massively, but let me give you a couple of things that might help sort of talk about that, to get into a little bit more detail. So one thing that I thought was really interesting was you've heard a lot about particularly geopolitical tension, where obviously that's very, that's a big topic for right now. And obviously there's been a lot of conversations about, what GPUs, for example, accelerated compute is going to be made available in which countries, et cetera, et cetera. So one thing that we found that was pretty interesting was that, in terms of how different countries rate themselves, again, looking at the two extremes. So asking who is going to win the AI race. So we asked that question, who is going to win the AI race? We asked these IT execs, we asked these CEOs, and 2/3 of them in the US thought they were going to win, right? But only about 40% in China thought they were going to win, right? And we found that really interesting, because we've actually seen is a huge drive in places like China towards very fast scaling of their operational capability. Actually, that's one of the questions we asked. We asked, what is the most important capability as you go and build out AI in China? 35% of their leaders ranked scalability as the top capability that they were going after, versus less than a quarter globally. So what that tells us is that China has a focus on rapid deployment and early impact, whereas I think there's much more development going on in other places. So that's places like the US, the UK, and India. Essentially, they're taking a sort of more integration approach, as in, how do we integrate this with existing systems, rather than kind of making some big bangs really early. And by the way, that comment you made about whether it's going to replace AI is going to replace workers. What we've seen, and this wasn't necessarily directly in this report, but I think it was supported by this report, was that very few of these productivity enhancements that we hear in AI, the ones that you would have heard more in the predictive and generative AI wave, actually delivered much in terms of real world savings for customers. It definitely gave people more time in the day. It didn't necessarily mean they needed less workers, but that is changing. We're seeing agentic in particular being a huge driver of fundamental shifts in the sort of ratio between capital and physical capital and human capital, right? So we are absolutely seeing that with agentic, but agentic has a whole other range of challenges around it, and we're just really getting started on that.
Excellent. Let's dive a little deeper. Tell me some other findings in the survey that you found very interesting.
Yeah. So one of the other things that we found pretty interesting was around cloud. So we NetApp has long since believed that AI is probably the most hybrid workload that we've ever seen as an industry, and there's a lot of reasoning for that. The primary reason is that the amount of investment that's going on in the hyperscalers, their ability to provide quickly scalable but also burstable workloads, but also the very rich, not just IaaS, but PaaS and SaaS services that the hyperscalers have built. It means that cloud, the ability to seamlessly leverage cloud services as part of an overall AI workflow is becoming a significant opportunity for customers. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that, yes, we have the big hyperscalers, but they're American. right? To be clear, they're American, right? And I just mentioned, this survey covered 4 countries, right? It covered China, it covered India, it covered the UK, US. Now, UK and US UK doesn't have quite as much concern about using US cloud services. But if you go to other places, obviously with some of the recent trade disputes that we've seen, we have seen a lot of nationalism come into this. Can I run this locally? And suddenly the considered over-reliance on US-based cloud services is starting to become a problem. So we're starting to see nations build their own cloud capabilities, not just rely.
No, absolutely. IT sovereignty is the buzzword of the day, and whether it's economic.
Alan, you saw DeepSeek. I mean, that was that was the shot across the bow, if there ever was one, right?
Sure was. It was a Sputnik kind of moment, but
yes, yeah.
But this is not. I would posit that this is not just limited to, let's say, China. And the obvious economic tensions with the U.S. Given today's balkanized world, and given the administration and outlook here in the U.S., there are many, many countries looking to have sovereignty over their data, over their IT resources, over their infrastructure. And I think this is a huge driver is going to be a huge driver of budgets in the coming cycles. And I think the recent Iran-U.S.-Israel triangle of war is only going to drive that, accelerate it.
100%. And I think that obviously, what the survey was showing us was that it was a combination of different factors. One of those factors is absolutely not wanting to be over reliant on US services, and some of that's because will those services be will they be a lever that's used in trade negotiations? There's issues around, just kind of where the money's flowing. But actually, one of the biggest challenges isn't any of that. It's actually to do with the fact that you mentioned LLMs and you mentioned data and just predominantly English. I mean, all the big LLMs, a lot of the investment was in English. And of course, you're going to countries where English isn't necessarily the first language or the only language. And suddenly you're seeing significant investments now from a range of different countries, including China in particular, but also India, which has a lot of regional obviously regional languages, to build out LLMs that can communicate in native tongue. So that's another reason we think that's actually driving this investment. But there is one thing I thought was super interesting. The perception of most of these organizations is that they're ready. So this, I found this absolutely fascinating, right? So 88% of the organizations that we surveyed felt that they were mostly or fully ready for AI. And we were just like blown away by that number, right? Because, that is so far from what we're seeing in the real world. There's another number that's interesting about this. The number of AI projects, we asked how many projects were failing, right? How many projects were failing? And what we found is that 79% of these organizations felt that they were lacking the risk mitigation and ethical practices required.
So about the same number who said they were ready.
Because I think again, it's back to, do I have physical boxes that can run AI workloads versus do I have the environment necessary to actually run those workloads, and it's all about, ensuring that you have clean, secure, and auditable data pipelines that can feed those AI systems with trustworthy, traceable, bias-aware data. Because if you don't have that, I mean, to be clear, that at a society level, the trust level for AI is not clear, right? That society is still struggling with how much they're willing to trust AI. And the reality is you can only fault AI for doing something wrong when the data is correct and it makes a mistake. But most of the time, that's not the issue. The issue is it's being fed bum data. And you get fed bad data. And that's all you know.
Bad in, it's bad out.
then it's bad out. So there is I think as not just as organizations, as NetApp obviously has a huge role to play in creating a data environment that does all those things really, really well. That's a huge focus for the company. We can do that on a hybrid basis. So we love that, right? So whether it's data integrity or data lineage, trustworthy data infrastructure is a huge part of what we do and what we've been building, honestly, for the last, certainly since the inception of AI, has been a huge focus for us. But I think that in general, society, we're walking this tightrope, and there's two ways this can go down. We can really focus on making AI trustworthy, or we can focus on speed. I don't know that it's easy to do both. I think NetApp is probably your best bet to do both if you wanted to go do both. But I think what we're seeing is that China's trying to get ahead. Some of the other countries are taking a much more reserved position. Regulation has a lot to do with this, right? So we're seeing the AI Act in the European Union come out. Some folks that seem to think it's a data privacy thing. It really isn't. It's really trying to explain what is acceptable in terms of the use and reliance on AI in society. I think it's a good thing. Most folks tend to think of regulation as holding stuff back. I actually have a completely opposite view of this, right? When I go out and talk to customers, I'll tell you this, Alan. When I go out and talk to customers, I hear one thing consistently, which is that lack of certainty about what is okay, what is acceptable, what will society bear, is actually holding organizations back. If society states through regulation, hey, this is acceptable, and you've got clear lines, you know what? That gives me carte blanche. I now understand what the context is. I don't have to second guess myself. As long as I know what those requirements are, I can stay within them. So we're seeing a lot of that sort of, I think that's a natural sort of next level of maturity that we're starting to see in the market.
I love it. Hey, Russell, we're probably over time, but for people who want to maybe go have a look at the survey, is there a place on the NetApp website they can go get the survey results or report?
Yeah, I'm sure we'll add it as a link to the to this video. Yes, there's a link on netapp.com where people can go read the report, which I highly recommend. It has got full of really interesting data. But at the end of the day, if I was just to kind of wrap it up from my perspective, right? So there are roadblocks to making AI impact meaningful, right? And most of it's relating to data, right? And if you can build an intelligent data infrastructure that manages that data, but also secures it, ensures it is trustworthy, makes it seamless on-prem and in the cloud, then you're in a really fantastic position to take advantage of whatever's coming at you. Because that's the last thing I'll tell you, Alan. Anyone that tells you they know what's going to happen in AI in 2 years, no one knows. So all you can do at this point is take advantage of what's in front of you and build an environment that is adaptable and agile so that when things come at you, you are quick and able to take advantage of them before your competition is. So that would be my key recommendation to your listeners, your viewers. But yeah, go read the report. I think it's really an interesting report, and it's definitely worth your time.
Absolutely. Look, if you're like me and you don't like to go through the notes on the videos, you can probably just Google NetApp's AI Space Race Survey and get it from there as well.
Most people just start on Google. Fair enough.
Yep. Russell, thank you so much for coming here on Techstrong TV. Come back anytime and keep us posted, all right?
Thanks, Alan. Appreciate it.
All right, good luck. Russell Fishman, Senior Director, Global Head of Solutions Product Management at NetApp, here on Techstrong TV. We'll take a break. We'll be back in a moment.
Hey everybody, we're back at the Open Source Summit in Denver, and we're here with Mukul Karnik, who's director of the Open Search Foundation, and we have all kinds of new and interesting things to talk about. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Great to be here. Yes, a lot of really exciting things to talk about. So just today we launched OpenSearch 3.1, and it's a continuing evolution of the powerful search and log analytics capabilities that OpenSearch has, and we have some exciting announcements in both search and log analytics, but also in the agentic space. And so, really exciting, like summit and a day.
Well, so let's go through that a little bit because when people hear OpenSearch, they're like, okay, search engine, I get it, full stop. But this is really a family of things that you guys have put together, and they have different use cases. So kind of walk us through a little bit of what you're seeing as some of the use cases, including the AI ones, but there's also observability and all kinds of stuff going on here. So we're seeing it almost everywhere.
Yeah, great point. Yes, OpenSearch, great search engine, as you said, and used in wide variety of use cases, but also a really powerful observability use case. Because if you think about it, when you're trying to solve an observability problem, at the core of it, you need search. And if you have a powerful search and analytics capability, you can get to your root cause very quickly, which is what you need to do for observability. And so, really good observability platform, also an emerging security analytics kind of use case, but largely search and observability platform.
And then on the AI side, well, we have vector databases, but we also need search to kind of make those applications work as well. What's the relationship?
Great question. Like OpenSearch, really powerful at search, but also we have a lot of really powerful vector database capabilities. And you'd think those two are independent things, but in some ways, like the search, think of it as like a keyword search, right? Where you're typing and you like get back to search results that are based on the keywords. What vector search or vector database lets you do is use the more semantic understanding of the words to be able to find the results that are more semantically related. So the combination of like the keyword search and the semantic search gives you more powerful search. Like it helps you answer the questions that you're asking more precisely and more quickly.
So the paradox in my mind is that we're using OpenSearch to create AI agents and apps, which in turn will be the things that we use to drive observability, invoking the rest of the capabilities of the platform. So is there some sort of like symmetrical loop occurring here?
That's a great observation. A lot of people miss that, but you're right. Like OpenSearch is a great search and a knowledge base if you think about it, right? And for getting your observability and understanding the root cause correctly, what you need is a good knowledge base. I mean, we as DevOps engineers, have that knowledge base within us, but it's also there in the run books. It's there in different wikis and different places, right? And so if all of that knowledge base exists in something like an OpenSearch, then you can really make your observability debugging even faster because you can now OpenSearch and the agents can understand the root cause much quickly because the data is there.
So among the new features that are being rolled out, are there any of your favorites? I know that's asking you to pick your favorite child, but are there things that, are a little more important than others?
Well, I think there's several very yeah, so it's hard to say which one is favorite, but I'll walk through a couple. So we, OpenSearch, as I was saying, leading vector database, one of the challenges we heard from users is indexing can take time. And so we built this GPU-based acceleration on the indexing side where you can, index 4, 5, sometimes even more, like 4, 5 times faster, even sometimes more. And so you can get all of that data into OpenSearch much more quickly to be able to start serving, requests. And so that's one really nice innovation which has really good application for a lot of users in the community. We are also building ability to have load graphs partially, and that gives you again ability to respond to results quickly. So it's making Gen AI more real time if you think about it like at a high level, and that is really powerful. The other set of capabilities is more on the analytics side and the observability side. We've introduced more richer analytical capabilities and analytical functions. Your documents that you index into OpenSearch, like these are logs, right? Could have any kind of structure and JSON format. And so we've introduced nested, JSON support and really a lot of rich analytical capabilities into open source.
Uh, Um, as we kind of move along here, it seems like the Linux Foundation itself has multiple AI initiatives. There's the PyTorch folks. We just talked about the A2A folks. Will there be cross pollination between all these groups, and how does that all come together in your mind?
I mean, in general, I think in the open source community, there's a lot of cross pollination that happens because I think innovations happening in each of the projects benefit. Like I think other projects, like you can kind of tag team in some ways, right? I mean. Um, Being able to leverage like in for example I'll pick open source, right? In within OpenSearch, we are leveraging Apache Calcite as a uh, uh, planning layer for OpenSearch, and then we are leveraging other projects to be able to then power some of the capabilities in OpenSearch. So it just that synergy exists between different open source projects. Within the Linux Foundation, we are also working on several, there are other, Gen AI and AI uh, capabilities, and as a community, we are looking at all the innovation that's already happened and leveraging that to benefit the users and community of OpenSage.
One of the things I think I've observed is that we used to kind of have developers over here and then the data managed over here, and it was kind of separate. In the age of AI, that all seems to be converging, and I see more and more developers, discovering data management fundamentals. So, do we need to kind of focus a little bit on skills and training there? And what are you guys doing about all that?
I think skills and training definitely. I think there's that like as I think a critical part of any of the Gen AI applications is the data, as your observation is, and I think understanding quality of the data and the capabilities of the tools that access the data is really important. I think the other important thing is also governance of the data and being able to make sure that you can track where the data is coming from, and like permissioning and all of that plays a big role in this world, because as these tools become more powerful and can access different things, you want to make sure that there's a good all of these projects such as written search are focusing on the data governance part of it.
All right. So you just got the new release out the door, and I'm sure everybody's asking you the same question. What's next, and when's it coming?
A lot of really exciting things. I mean, this was the 3.1 release. We had 3.0 in April, and just within a short span of like 2 or 3 months, we have some amazing new things. Our pace of innovation is growing. I mean, if you like, we transitioned to Linux Foundation in September, and since then we've seen about 46% jump in our active contributors, and so that's driving all of this innovation. And so we'll see a lot more features come out, uh, and continuing to innovate in this, in the space of search, vector databases, agentic now with all the MCP support that we have, and then also in the observability space where a lot of the rich analytical capabilities, making it more accessible to all these agentic tools.
All right, folks, you heard it here. If you want to stay close to what's happening in AI, keep your eye on the Open Search Foundation, because I think they're closer to it than just about anybody else. Hey, thanks for coming by.
Thanks, Mike. Great to talk to you.
All right, and we'll be back in a minute. Hey guys, thanks to the throw. We're here with Aaron Costello, who's head of SaaS threat research for App Omni, and we're talking about,
There's been a spate of issues that have arisen, shall we say. We don't know if there's been some actual breaches yet, but maybe there has. But Aaron probably knows better than we do. But we're going to talk about, is this whole area being overlooked from a security perspective? Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on.
So just recently, we saw that Salesforce fixed a lot of issues. Some of them were fairly high severity, at least in terms of vulnerabilities. But um, I don't hear a lot about this issue. And so my question to you is, is this just flying under the radar and it's a bigger threat than we realize?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at my research and it's tackling the suite of Salesforce industry cloud products, tens of thousands of organizations are using these products, right? When we look at our own internal telemetry, we protect 25% of the Fortune 100 over at AppOmni, and nearly 1/3 of our customers are using one of the Salesforce industry clouds. So the potential blast radius for this research is quite big.
Mm. I don't always like to beat up on a particular vendor because I sometimes think of error for the grace of God, go as everybody else. But is this problem endemic to all the SaaS platforms?
So it's endemic to the Salesforce industry cloud suite of products specifically. So Salesforce industry clouds encompass, I believe, 11 individual, we say verticals or products. So industry clouds encompass a platform for the public sector, financial solutions, communications and telecommunications, and insurance, and also health. So there are 11 individual products within that suite, and each one of those products is affected.
Right. Who's in charge of this? Because the SaaS apps are usually bought by somebody in a business unit lead or maybe at the C level somewhere. But it's not clear to me the cybersecurity people are always involved, and there's probably not a lot of processes in place for checking how things are configured.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we see that's quite endemic across the vast majority of SaaS customers. It's really whose responsibility is this to configure security and use correctly. And that can vary from organization to organization. So in some cases, it may be the responsibility of the platform administrator. So these would be your kind of SaaS SME experts of Salesforce or whoever internally. It could also be the responsibility of the individual security teams. These could be your standard application security teams, for example, but often it can vary from organization to organization. And that's part of the problem with tackling these issues, is finding who is really responsible within your organization for securing these things.
Is there some way to holistically secure them? Because counting on mere mortals who are administrators of the Salesforce platform or whatever else it is to do the right thing is almost a zero-sum game. The odds of winning that are low. So is there some way to kind of put controls in place that don't make me dependent upon somebody who has no cybersecurity training to do the right thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at my research as a whole, there was around 20 findings, right? And 15 of those security risks are the responsibility of the customer to secure. And these are all things that can be secured from within the platform. So these are items such as enabling certain security guardrails, like settings and configuration settings that may enforce a access control, for example, across the entire organization to lock it down. Or it could be to do with custom development. So on these platforms, if things are being built in Salesforce Industry Cloud, ensuring that those components are built adhering to development best practices is something that organizations need to be doing.
Right. We talk a lot about shared responsibility in the age of the cloud, and I think everybody nods their heads, but it's not clear to me everybody knows exactly what's entailed or what's required there, because, well, we seem to get it wrong a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that we still get queries about to this day from customers, especially with respect to this research. So generally speaking, once a organization purchases a product or SaaS software such as Salesforce, the software is inherently secure out of the box. So all of the configuration settings and the properties and the access controls are, generally speaking, completely fine, and you're at no risk. But as organizations start to build on these platforms and add their own customizations, those customizations and those changes that they're making to that software or to the configuration of that software is their own responsibility. So typically what we like to say is, if a security issue is a problem or a risk in the software itself, and so it affects all Salesforce customers out of the box on brand new deployed instances, that is the responsibility of the vendor, of Salesforce, to fix. Whereas if the issue has arisen because of a change that was made by your organization to a configuration within the platform or through development on the platform, then that is the responsibility of your organization, the customer, to fix.
Time is usually of the essence in these matters, and what you just described sounded like it takes a long time to figure out who's responsible for what whenever there's an incident or an issue. So is there some way to narrow that gap?
Well, really, it's just establishing, and this is really the dream, it's establishing the security process from the very beginning. And as I'd mentioned earlier on, this can differ from organization to organization. So for example, one organization, it may be a scenario in which the platform owner, the Salesforce expert, may be the one to take it on themselves to perform these audits, either manually or through an automated tool like AppOmni, to ensure that their access controls and configurations are secure, because these individuals have that Salesforce knowledge. And so they're familiar with the security concept of the platforms. However, in other organizations, the security teams are the ones who are responsible for resolving these issues and hunting for these issues on the platforms. And that's another viable solution for responsibility, because these are security-minded individuals. They kind of know the general concepts and risks and what to look for in the platforms. The issue with that may be that they do not have the platform-specific knowledge to tackle the problems effectively. So all in all, I would recommend that the security teams and the platform owners, these system administrators of the SaaS platforms, work together to tackle these issues.
Do you think that maybe someday soon we'll have an AI agent that will help us sort all this out? Because it seems like a lot of this is just simply having enough bandwidth to consume all the configuration data and then validate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we're already seeing a lot of LLMs, AI agents, analyzing code, for example, and that's not different when looking at security configurations also. So all of this data is stored on the platform. So if we're feeding an AI agent an image of what secure looks like and what good looks like, then that agent can be responsible for ensuring that the security configurations stay secure, because it has that visibility into the platform. So potentially, we don't know, something such as Agentforce on Salesforce may be leveraged in the future for ensuring the maintenance of security controls on the platform.
What's that one thing you see customers doing over and over again that just makes you shake your head a little bit and go, folks, we need to be a little bit better than that?
Taking the fastest, quickest route to solve a problem is 99% of the time the reason that these security issues arise, because it's the easiest solution. So if they're building or writing some code to pull some data, it's very quick and easy to just say, hey, pull this data and give it to the person. And they're not putting in security best practices when developing that code, because then you need to start thinking about, okay, well, are the end users using this code? Do they have the permissions? Do I need to assign the permissions? Do I need to analyze the permissions? And while that's the best practice, naturally that takes longer. So it's really a matter of trying to get a solution built in the quickest time frame possible is leading to these kind of an endemic of security issues on the SaaS platforms.
Do you think that the compliance regulations are stringent enough, or are they still a little too loose? And so everybody will say, yeah, I complied, but they're not really secure.
That's a great question. Generally speaking, what I've noticed is it's very difficult to apply a lot of these compliance frameworks like NIST to SaaS products specifically, because they were not built specifically for SaaS products. And so there isn't really a one size fits all solution to ensuring that your Salesforce instance or your ServiceNow instance is compliant with SOC 2 or NIST CSF or any of these frameworks. So personally, I would really like to see something like Scuba. So Scuba was recently mandated by CISA, and it's effectively a framework, a government framework that government bodies in the US need to apply to their Microsoft instances. And it describes a whole manner of security controls that need to be in place. And so I would really like to see that expanded on, not just for the public sector, but also for the private sector.
Yeah. Are there, I don't hear much about this, but are people and organizations being fined because of SaaS security issues, or are the regulators just not even on this because there's so many other things they got to worry about?
That's a great question. I would imagine it's the latter more than anything else. Typically, SaaS is a bit of a blind spot, which is strange considering your organization's most sensitive data is typically stored in the cloud on these SaaS platforms. But I think with the relatively recent upsurge in attacks over the past couple of years, we look at like Midnight Blizzard and more threat actors targeting SaaS platforms specifically. I think the importance of SaaS security and regulation of SaaS security is something that we'll see implemented a bit more stringently over the next couple of years.
All right. So ultimately, what's your best advice to folks who are in charge of this whole area? Because I don't think anybody deliberately gets up in the morning and says, let's not bother with securing these applications, but I got a feeling they're a little overwhelmed and just don't know where to get started.
That's the golden question, really. I'd love to provide an answer that could apply to all organizations of all shapes and sizes. But really starting from the ground up when it comes to even just procuring these SaaS applications is when I believe organizations need to do the most amount of due diligence. So when procuring a SaaS application, ensure that while it must fit your business use cases, it also is compliant with your own security policies internally. So does the SaaS application allow for various forms of MFA? Are there adequate access control solutions built in the platform? Are we able to ingest activity logging? Is that made available by the SaaS platform? And can we have visibility into potential breaches and attacks? So that's really step one, in my opinion, ensuring that it's compliant from a security perspective to what your organization typically needs. And then from that point onwards, delegating the responsibility when it comes to security and maintaining the security of the platform. So maintaining what I was speaking about earlier on, those configurations, delegating that to either the platform owner, whether it's the AppSec teams, or if they're kind of working together more holistically, is another viable solution. So delegating that responsibility, in my opinion, is step two. Secure by default and building everything with security in mind, step three. So apply the same stringent level of auditing, of scrutiny from a security perspective to everything that you build on these SaaS platforms. Imagine it's a custom solution that your organization has built, because typically if an organization is building their own website or their own CRM, it goes through a CI/CD DevSecOps process and is heavily scrutinized by the internal security teams. And I would love to see the same approach apply to these SaaS platforms. And then, in addition to all of this, I won't sugarcoat it. If you are a large enterprise organization, maintaining all of these security controls and all of these best practices manually is really not going to be that feasible if you are a very large organization that's heavily using a SaaS product like Salesforce. If you've got thousands of users logging in every single day, people building things consistently, manually auditing permissions, access controls, and configurations, and ensuring that they stay up to date is just not very, very feasible. Not all organizations will have the budget or the headcount to build an automated solution to maintain those security controls. So look into getting an SSPM tool. I am biased, naturally, like AppOmni, that will routinely and regularly assess those security controls and also provide you insight into the activity that's happening on your SaaS platform, so that you can be both preventative from risks, so identify risks and lock them down before attackers take advantage of them. And the worst case scenario, if there is a breach in progress, it can be retroactive and use an SSPM like AppOmni to identify these attacks as they're happening and shut them down.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Hey, there's a lot of SaaS platforms now being used by everybody, and it's not gone unnoticed by the bad guys who have become a lot more adept at just stealing credentials and logging in rather than actually breaking in. And, well, the best place to log in is usually a SaaS application. Hey, Aaron, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right, and back to you guys in the studio.
The world is filled with promises of the next best thing just around the corner, and wireless is no different. Wi-Fi 7 promises to be the fastest thing that you've ever seen. But unfortunately, one of the pieces that is promising that isn't ready just yet. In this episode, we're going to talk about MLO is a lie. Welcome to the Tech Field Day podcast, where each episode we bring together a group of experts from across the enterprise IT space to debate a number of topics and theories in enterprise IT. Tech Field Day is a part of the Futurum Group, and each episode is usually recorded in conjunction with one of our Tech Field Day events. We're here at Mobility Field Day this week, but before we introduce the topic or premise for this episode, I'd like to take a moment for our guests to introduce themselves. Alan?
I'm Alan Crow. I'm a principal engineer at Nexum.
Peter McKenzie from the UK, and I've been a wireless nerd for 25 years now.
Chris Reed, principal consultant at Verizon, focusing on Wi-Fi.
And I'm Tom Hollingsworth, practice lead for mobility at Tech Field Day. Let's jump into the premise for this episode. No doubt you've seen lots of coverage of something called Wi-Fi 7. You don't know what it is, but you know that you need it because the number is bigger. That means that it must be better. But the primary feature that everyone is looking for in Wi-Fi 7 is something called multi-link operation, or MLO. But unfortunately, I have news for you. MLO is a lie. Okay, let's jump into that because I can hear people typing about how I'm wrong, and Lord knows I love to be wrong on the internet. But gentlemen, what is multi-link operation, and why is it something that so many people are clamoring for in this latest revision of Wi-Fi?
Yeah, so setting the stage first, MLO is the ability for a client to send or receive frames to two different radios, either the same frame or different frames staggered, or to two different APs at the same time. So fundamentally, that's what it is. And the benefit is supposedly both speed increases as well as reliability increases of those same transmissions. It's been the primary seller of the Wi-Fi 7. It's been the hotness for it. But I don't know that, at least to start with, it's going to work at all. We had enough problems with OFDMA. Even now, getting it to work in the real world and having a real benefit from it has been a problem. And that was a technology that was already in use. It was already on radios. They already understood the behavior for it. We just adopted it into Wi-Fi, and it still had that problem. Now you're telling me that we're expecting this to work across multiple APs at the same time. I have real concerns about that happening in the real world, at least in the short to midterm.
We have enough problems roaming between two APs, let alone talking to two APs at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the other thing to be said about multi-link operation is it's not just all those benefits, better reliability, increased speed, that you don't actually get all of those. There's different flavors of multi-link operation, and depending on which flavor you implement will depend on what benefit you get. And I don't think that's, people already talk about that as much with it as well. And I guess one question I've got is which flavor is actually going to bring a tangible benefit that we'll actually see in enterprise class networks.
Well, I want to back up a little bit here because one of the things that I think we might want to explain also to our audience out there, why do we need multi-link operation? Because I can think of a time back in my formative years when I was studying how to create ether channels and LACP trunks between switches. And at no point was this ever sold to me as, double the bandwidth. In fact, usually the way that it was described was it was redundancy, right? So if one of my cables goes out, that it's still one link and all the traffic's going back and forth between one. In fact, anybody who ever told me, oh, well, if you lag two ether channels together, you're going to get 2 gigabits per second, they obviously didn't know what they were doing because there was a preference for it to pick one channel. Why do we need MLO? Is it going to increase speeds for Wi-Fi? Is it going to increase reliability for Wi-Fi?
Who do we want to listen to, though?
Well,
we want to listen to the marketing people who tell us it automatically makes it faster? Is it the practitioners that talk to us more about, it is going to add reliability, it's going to add survivability, and some of the rest of it? I think that's some of what, at least from my perspective, we run into these days, is especially with Wi-Fi being driven very heavily on the consumer side, everything's all about faster, faster, faster. You said it, in the intro, it's why do I need Wi-Fi 7? Because the number's bigger.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what we, in a lot of cases, especially in the SMB market, we suffer from a technology standpoint. What are we looking to get out of MLO is a great question.
Yeah, and to Peter's point earlier, we have to talk about the separate flavors and the benefit that comes with that flavor. So let's talk about the benefit of reliability. So in that scenario, it'd be sending the same frame to 2 different radios. That way, if one doesn't get there, the other one is going to. You're getting reliability there, but at the expense of you're using double the bandwidth because you're using the other radio's bandwidth as well at the same time.
And that's just one flavor, isn't it? Of reliability.
Yeah.
This is the problem with MLO. There's so many different flavors. So sending the same frame to 2 radios requires you to have a multi-radio scenario.
Yeah.
Whereas I think most clients are just single radio, so they're going to be doing what they call single radio, where they're going to be able to establish a connection with, say, a 5 gigahertz and a 6 gigahertz radio of the same AP. But they'll only ever be able to use one of those connections at any one time. So does that increase reliability? Well, potentially, yeah. So one of the problems with Wi-Fi is sometimes congestion. Channels get congested. If you've ever been on a Zoom call on a congested channel, you end up sometimes getting jitter, delay, and especially on 2.4 gigahertz, actually, that's where we see it a lot.
Right.
If you've got the ability to go per packet, actually, I want to choose which link is the least congested. I'm going to send on that link, and if that link becomes congested or interference, which was what one of the presenters talked about, I can then use the other link. I think that does potentially give us a benefit for real-time applications like video and streaming. So I see that as potentially a real benefit. All the other MLO benefits, I'm not sure about.
But it's a lot of complication for a slightly niche use case because outside of real-time applications, like do kind of standard TCP transmissions, does that need that, or is it only UDP real-time protocols that we care about using that for?
But they're becoming more important, aren't they? Like, and now we're used to asking Wi-Fi design, didn't we? Do you want to do VoIP? We never ask that question anymore because Teams, Zooms, calls are a daily norm. in the enterprise office environment. So everyone is doing real-time voice and video now on Wi-Fi. So I think if we can increase reliability of that, I think that can be a benefit. I'm not, but in terms of all the other benefits of MLO, I'm not convinced.
And I think my concern is, at least in these initial phases that we're seeing, it's still heavily reliant on 2.4, right? In a lot of cases, the clients we're seeing it's 2.4 and 5, maybe some 5 and 6. And I think that as practitioners, we've deprecated the use. We've kind of said 2.4, yeah, we'll do it, but how much do we rely on it to be available and ready to take video calls? Because if we're on 5 and our switch is to 2.4, and we don't have our 2.4 network in a state that's ready for a video call, it's not going to get better.
Well,
and it's how reliable is that going to be?
And we've been teaching take your 2.4 gigahertz away from your corporate network. I disable it.
Yeah.
So and have different SSIDs on 2.4 and 5 gig. So you can do MLO with different SSIDs.
Right.
So I do think the real benefit will come with 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Not 2.4.
Yeah.
But then we need a wider deployment of 6 gig radios to do that.
Which brings into all the fun that we need to deploy this, right? It's not just MLO that we've got to deploy now, right? As much as we would love to say everybody's doing WPA3, how many people are doing WPA3? And what does that bring into the folks that aren't doing it? And where do we go there?
Well, I think that's a good answer because MLO requires Wi-Fi 7.
Yeah.
And Wi-Fi 7 requires WPA3. So if you're on 5 gigahertz and 2.4 and you want to enable MLO or Wi-Fi 7 at all, it has to be a Wi-Fi 7 only SSID, which means any legacy clients that are in 2.4 or 5 gig won't be able to connect. And I don't think that's been quite thought through as much. So in the 6 gigahertz band, that's great. That's all fresh. It's new.
Mm-hmm. So if you've got a legacy right now, let's just talk pre-shared key only. So if you've got a legacy 2.4 and 5 gigahertz radio, it's WPA2 PSK.
Yeah.
You swap that out for your fancy new Wi-Fi 7 AP. In order to use this, you have to migrate to WPA3. Your clients have to support beacon protection. Your clients also have to support management frame protection, which is required for WPA3. But in legacy WPA2, when we enabled it, we did have a lot of client problems. So there's a few steps that we have to get to in order to even start to play with this, much less use it and see a real world benefit.
And I'd say luckily, at least for those people who are running a WPA2 with a PSK, and that's it, it's easier for them, right? It's the enterprises that are on WPA2 with EAP-PEEP or something like that, where they've got to make that jump to EAP-TLS and certificates and the PKI that comes with it and all those things to get to WPA3, to then get to Wi-Fi 7, to then get to MLO. And I know, we also see in some of the hardware where they're 2.4 and 5 only, but they're Wi-Fi 7 APs, right? So now we've got I can't buy these APs because I want to get to 5 and 6, but I can't because that AP is Wi-Fi 7, but doesn't have 6 gigahertz.
Go for it.
No, but I think that's good though. It's good that Wi-Fi 7 supports all the bands. Like if we're only focusing on 5 or only had it on the 6 gigahertz radio, it's not as much of a benefit. But I like that it's in 2.4 for specific
I think
use
it's
cases.
got to for MLO to be a thing.
Oh, yeah.
I think though, here's a question. We've talked a bit about reliability and some of the issues. Do we need, if you're using it for throughput, so that's when you're going to split your data over 2 links.
Sure.
Do we need it? Do we need more throughput?
Always.
Well,
we always need more throughput.
But obviously, you must have watched the previous episode of this podcast where we talked about the fact that Wi-Fi 7 is fast enough. Because most of the time that we run into these problems where people are complaining that the Wi-Fi is down or that we're not getting enough bandwidth, it has absolutely nothing to do with the underlying infrastructure. And it has more to do with the fact that the application that you're using has bad coding that won't allow it to take advantage of multiple links, or that your AP is only uplinked at 1 or 2 gigs at most, and then your internet connection is 100 megabits or 400 megabits. Yeah. So it doesn't matter how fast we can get the Wi-Fi to run unless you're transferring a movie from your laptop to your Plex server.
But even then, I'm not totally convinced you need multi-link operation, multi-radio. I'm just not convinced we need it. I think there's a few niche cases, potentially in the home when you talk about, doing VR gaming and you want to have, I don't know, 20, 30 people all in some sort of immersive VR game that's going to be all connected over the Wi-Fi. There is those type of scenarios,
right? But
in a standard enterprise, I just don't think users require. I still say today, if you gave me a AC access point, I could probably design it for a wireless network to meet any enterprise's requirements today.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we saw the same thing when we started sticking multi-gig interfaces and 10 gig interfaces in our APs, and people are like, we're not even using a gig interface. Why are we doing those higher level uplinks? Well, it's some of the same questions when we're talking the radio side.
6 gigahertz low power indoor is kind of the first time that we've really been able to see it start to push that 1 gig limit.
Right.
So now I think it makes a little more sense to have them in those radios. But remember, that's relatively recent as well.
Yeah.
So we're talking about, do we need extra bandwidth? We just went from 25 channels on 5 gigahertz if you're using all of them. We got that extra 1200 megahertz spectrum, so now we can do wider channels. We're getting more speed from that. Do we now need additional speed on top of it?
Sure.
I don't know how many people at their house are running 320 megahertz channels and have the latest gear that allows them to do some form of MLO because they're, I don't know, downloading weather data sets.
But I remember, even in my house, my limit is my internet backhaul connection. It's not my Wi-Fi. Yeah. I can max out I think get 200 meg at home, but I max out my 200 meg, about 220, over the Wi-Fi. And I was doing that with AC equipment.
Yeah.
I can make my Wi-Fi go faster, but
there's still that push to home, that push in consumer that consumer gets 7 first. There's bigger, better, massive APs with, porcupine antennas coming every which direction, and I can go faster. They're gaming routers, right? That kind of thing. But yeah, we're still hitting that limit. I mean, we are starting to see higher adoptance of gig to the home. And so, it is coming. But yeah, I think on the enterprise side, no.
So could it be that the reason why consumers get it first, other than the fact that they're more than willing to pay for it, is that they're never going to hit the head limits of what Wi-Fi 7 can provide. So for them, it feels faster because of the placebo effect without all of the features that are actually necessary to make it go faster.
And I think it's that. I think the other piece is a lot of home Wi-Fi is terrible. And so if you're going to take, and we have, let's say it's a gig channel on our, on the Wi-Fi, right? If we say it's a gig theoretical, and it's deployed horribly, and they're only getting 500 meg, well, if I make that, gig theoretical, 2 gig theoretical, and they're only getting gig, it is faster for them. They're still hitting that limit when they hit the internet.
Yeah, but home use, home in the middle of the field is kind of the only place that those super wide channels make any sense.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you get into a neighborhood or you get into an apartment building, there's already enough contention around that you're not getting the advantage of those.
But they're still deploying them.
Out of the box, like all over the place. These home devices are shipping and coming up with 160 megahertz wide channels by default, 320 megahertz wide. I'm expecting 320 megahertz wide channels by default for the Wi-Fi 7 products as well.
Yeah. But it goes back to one of the things that Sam Clemens wrote years ago about drag racing school buses. Why do we ship them by default? Because that way when they get tested, they run as fast as possible. And I don't have to deal with the fallout of what happens when they're broken. You have to call support and figure out why your neighbor keeps dropping your Wi-Fi connection. But it comes back to bigger number, better. And we've been dealing with that in IT for years.
Yeah.
But when you get into the nuance of what actually makes it better and why this isn't ready for prime time yet, how can we approach the stakeholders in an organization who may be hell-bent on deploying this and then hell-bent on seeing massive performance increases and being sorely disappointed with their investment when bigger number, not so much bigger?
I think that's a really key point, and I see this all the time, and I've done deployments. Saw it with AX. We deployed some new AX APs, and I ended up having to turn off most of the AX features And it was just because of all the, so you think about multi-user MIMO, the channel sounding and the overhead associated with it actually made them have less airtime. So, and when I turned off all the features, it worked better than their own system. But our business unit said we have to turn those features on because that's what we've been sold on. And I was like, you turn them on, they won't work. You're going to see less performance. I've got it optimized, but they just, But from a business point of view, they said, no, we spend money on AX. We want the AX features turned on. And if they don't work, we want the vendor to go and fix it.
Yeah, but before we even get to whether we can use it, if it all works perfectly, the problem is going to be on the manufacturer chipsets and drivers, as well as the client chipsets and drivers. Are they going to implement it properly? Is it all going to work correctly? Are they going to make the calculations to actually have it happen? Or is that calculation going to come up with, I'm never going to try this? Because even if you enable it in the infrastructure, if the client device isn't participating in it, doesn't matter.
And that goes back to the other problem of this is a two-pronged problem. I can go to my favorite big box store or my favorite online retailer and order a brand new Porcupine AP that supports every cool feature set of Wi-Fi 7. And if my iPad from 2019 still goes as fast as it was going, I'm going to rant and rave and scream and leave bad reviews, not realizing that the Wi-Fi client chipset in my device is nowhere near ready to support this. And how do we communicate that to users that, oh yeah, we can definitely support MLO if you're willing to buy everybody in the building new laptops?
And even those new laptops.
The right new laptop.
Yeah, you have to buy the right new laptops because a lot of them aren't shipping with Wi-Fi 7 chipsets yet.
Are we getting back to this problem with 802.11n when Belkin shipped a pre-standard version that only worked with one card? Because I can tell you what it felt like deploying that to the owner of the company and him wondering why his brand new laptop didn't work with his brand new AP. And I'm like, well, you got to use the card that came with it.
And then it's not just the card, does the operating system support it as well? So with Windows, you've got to be Windows 11 and you've got to have a certain patch installed.
Yep.
Or you're not supporting Wi-Fi, you're not doing any Wi-Fi 7 features.
And maybe that's why Microsoft is forcing all the new updates, right?
Yeah.
But then it comes back to, well, why should it only Windows 11 do it? Because I'm not going to install Windows 11 on my machine because I don't have a TPM 2.0. So why can't you make this work on Windows 10?
Yep.
And then someone's going to come out with a software program that you install on Windows 10 to enable this feature, and it's actually malware, and you've compromised your machine. But people will do just about anything to be faster.
Yep.
So how can we educate the wider populace about the nuances about why Wi-Fi 7 really is better, but what better actually means?
So I don't think it's anything that we can really do. We as practitioners can really do. This is a tale as old as time problem. This is marketing coming out with statements that are technically true, but not accurate. We ran into this with the wider channel widths and AX and AC and the speeds that they could do, and that you need 5 gig ports on it. You didn't. You absolutely didn't. We come out with data sheets that say this AP can support 1,000 clients. Yes, they can associate. No one's doing anything if it's at 1,000 clients. And it's not just Wi-Fi. It's across other other technologies as well. We look at firewall data sheets and the amount of throughput that they say. Yes, but if you enable any feature whatsoever, it's half of that throughput. This is all just marketing. It's not a technology problem.
Yeah, and I love my friends in marketing, but at the same time, we've got to figure out a way that our data sheets, that our communications, that those kind of things are realistic numbers, not the theoretical max. I mean, we could talk about 4K QAM, right? I mean,
nobody talks about 4K.
I know. Well, why? Because we know it's not realistic. I think that's we as practitioners, the only way that we can do this is continuing to push that talk track of here's the realistic numbers. I've had that conversation with clients. They're like, well, this data sheet says it can support 500 users. Why do you need 5 of them in this area? It's like, well, because it can't, realistically. We have to bring them back.
I think another thing that's worth maybe mentioning, and again, I don't know how we educate people like this, but there's someone that one of the chipset manufacturers said to me, is that they will, when they bring out, let's say, a Wi-Fi 7 chipset, the first chipsets out the door are not going to be, there's going to be problems with it, it's not going to work very well, same with the first, but the next chipset they bring out will be Wi-Fi 8. They're not going to bring out a Hayes Hour fixed Wi-Fi 7 one. But if you want to get good Wi-Fi 7 AP, you probably need to buy Wi-Fi 8 AP. If you wanted to have a good AC access point, actually the AX APs were probably the best AC ones, and the Wi-Fi 7 APs are probably really good AX APs. So you've got to not think, so that's why when there's a selling us on all these new features, you've got to say, well, actually, no, this is a really good AX AP. Because it's actually they've actually improved a lot of the features of AX in the Wi-Fi 7 chipsets. And then all the new features that are probably the stuff that's not going to work very well.
Yeah,
how we communicate that, I don't know.
It's the first pancake problem, right? No matter what you do, the first pancake is never going to look or taste right. And by the time you get to the last pancake, you figured everything out. But except for AC Wave 1 and Wave 2, we're never going to see a Wi-Fi 7 Wave 2.
No, we're not.
We're going to see Wi-Fi 8 Wave 1, where we really worked our butts off to make this reality. So I guess you're just going to have to go with it.
And we've seen that from the vendors saying, yeah, here's all the things that are in even 6E, right? And 7. Here's all the things that are in the spec, but we've only implemented these. And yeah, you may see a Wave 2, and then it's like, no, because the speed we're going.
Because they're optional, not required.
Yeah, and I think that's some of those same communication points that we continuously run into.
But as well, when you're a customer and you're buying this, you're buying a Wi-Fi 7 AP, the future proofing that you get from Wi-Fi 7 isn't Wi-Fi 7. It's 6 gigahertz.
Yeah.
It's not even 6E. It's just it's the spectrum, and you've got that in that radio. That's what gets you the benefits now.
Yep.
Whether it's AI intelligence or autonomous driving or even a foldable phone, we're being sold on the promise of something great that's just around the corner. And it's not quite ready yet, but if you stick with me for a little bit longer, you're going to see something amazing until you have to go buy something completely different because it turns out we didn't know how to make that work in the first place. And I feel like that's kind of where we are with MLO. Everyone keeps hearing about how important it is and how much better it's going to make things, and they're ignoring all of the other things that have been included that improve what's going on. I mean, we've been fighting this battle for years. I remember when people were telling me that 802.11 AC was going to be so much better, except you had to be running on 5 gigahertz all the time to use it because there were no improvements in 2.4 other than removing congestion. So we have to be realistic about what we're actually looking for. And we have to be ready to do the hard work to take advantage of those solutions. And maybe that means upgrading our hardware. Maybe that means leaning on our software vendors to be more supportive of what we're trying to accomplish. But it also means that maybe we have to be realistic about what we're actually needing instead of just hoping that the speedometer goes all the way to the other side and I can claim that it's faster. That'll just about do it for this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast. Before we leave, I'd like to let our guests let you know where you can find more of what they like to talk about. Alan?
Yep. Alan Crow, you can find me on LinkedIn or hit me up at NetSec Plumber because I'm the plumber at a security company.
Yeah, Peter McKenzie. I'm McKenzieWiFi.com is my website, and at McKenzie Wi-Fi on LinkedIn, Twitter, Blue Sky, and YouTube.
Chris Reed, you can find me on Blue Sky at the CM Reed, or you can find me on LinkedIn or occasionally in the woods.
And you can find more great episodes of the Tech Field Day podcast by going to techfieldday.com/podcast. You can also subscribe to our newsletter and check out all of the events that we have coming up. Tech Field Day is a part of the Futurum Group, and if you'd like to learn more about our offerings there, please head over to futurumgroup.com. We release a new episode of this podcast every week, so make sure that you're subscribed or that you're following along in your favorite podcast application of choice. Just look for the Tech Field Day podcast. While you're out there, leave us a rating and a review so everybody knows the kind of fun that we like to have around here with technology. We'll be back next week with another great episode. Until then, take care.